He slammed his fist on my kitchen table so hard the coffee mugs rattled, and then he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You are a sad, bitter old woman, and nobody wants you around anymore. Not even Dad wanted you. That's why he died, just to get away." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I stood at the sink with a dish towel in my hands, and I let those words land on me the way cold rain lands on old stone. I felt them. I will not pretend I didn't. But I did not crumble. I simply turned back to the sink and kept washing the pan I had used to make his dinner. That was the night everything changed. Not because I screamed back, not because I packed a bag and walked out the door. It changed because of what I decided, quietly and completely. Standing at that sink, listening to my son's footsteps stomp down the hallway toward the bedroom that used to belong to me. My name is Margaret. I am 67 years old. I worked as a registered nurse for 31 years at Mercy General Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. I have held the hands of strangers as they took their last breath. I have stayed calm during emergencies that would make most people collapse. I raised my son, Daniel, alone after his father, my husband, Robert, passed away from a heart attack 11 years ago. I paid off this house, every single cent of the mortgage. I paid with my own hands and my own hours and my own tired feet. I want you to understand what kind of woman I am before I tell you what happened. I am not a weak woman. I have never been a weak woman. But I am a mother, and being a mother, I have learned, can make you believe things about your child that are not true. It can make you hold on long after you should have let go. Daniel was a good boy once. I mean that honestly. He was curious and funny and kind-hearted in the way young boys can be before the world gets its hands on them. He played baseball in the backyard with his father on Sunday afternoons. He used to bring me dandelions from the neighbor's yard and call them flowers. He cried at his father's funeral in a way that broke me open, and I held him and told him we would be all right. We would figure it out together. That was 11 years ago. My son is now 42 years old, and the man who showed up on my doorstep 18 months ago with 3 suitcases and a wounded pride was not that boy. Not even close. His marriage to Claire had ended. I will not assign blame for that. I was not inside their marriage, and I do not know everything that happened. What I do know is that my granddaughter, Sophie, was 8 years old when it ended, and she was confused and frightened and quieter than any child should ever be. Sophie has her grandfather's eyes, dark brown and deep-set, the kind that seem to be thinking something even when the rest of the face is still. The first night they arrived, she climbed into my lap without asking and pressed her face against my shoulder, and I put my arms around her, and I thought, whatever else is happening, this little girl needs steadiness. She needs one thing in her life that does not shake. I told Daniel he could stay with me until he found his footing. Those were my exact words. Until you find your footing, Daniel. This is not a permanent arrangement. He nodded and thanked me and carried his bags inside, and I showed him to the guest room and put fresh towels on the rack and did not say anything about the fact that he had brought his PlayStation and his golf clubs, but had not once asked what might be convenient for me. I should have known then. I should have read the signs more carefully, but again I am a mother, and mothers, sometimes, read hope into things that are not hopeful at all. The first few months were manageable, uncomfortable, but manageable. Daniel slept late. He left dishes in the sink. He came and went at odd hours without telling me where he was going or when he would return. I reminded myself he was grieving the end of his marriage. I reminded myself he was 42 years old and humiliated and scared, even if he would never admit to the scared part. I cooked. I cleaned. I watched Sophie in the afternoons when she came home from school, and those hours with her were the best part of every day. Sophie would sit at the kitchen table doing her homework while I made a snack, and she would tell me about her teacher, Mrs. Albright, and about her best friend at school named Cora, and about a book she was reading about a girl who trained horses. She had this way of tilting her head to one side when she was thinking hard about something, exactly the way Robert used to do, and every time she did it, my heart would do a small private thing that I kept to myself. "Grandma," she asked me, one evening in October, about 4 months after she and Daniel had moved in, "do you ever get lonely?" I considered lying. Parents lie to children to protect them. Grandmothers do too. But Sophie had those old soul eyes, and I did not think she would be fooled. "Sometimes," I said. But not when you're here. She nodded slowly, like she had suspected as much. Then she went back to her homework, and I went back to the stove, and neither of us said anything more about it. I did not notice the changes happening in the house gradually, or rather, I noticed them, but I explained them away. Daniel started inviting his friends over without asking. There was a man named Greg who came most Friday evenings, and the two of them would sit in the living room watching football until past midnight, and I would lie in my new bedroom. I had moved to the smaller room so Daniel could have the larger one, because I told myself it was temporary, listening to the television through the wall. Daniel started taking phone calls in a lowered voice that stopped whenever I entered the room. He started asking questions about the house. Casual questions slipped into ordinary conversation. Do you know what houses are selling for in this neighborhood right now? And, my buddy says, property values have gone up a lot since you bought this place. And once, in the kitchen when I was putting away groceries. Have you ever thought about downsizing? Like a condo or one of those retirement communities? I looked at him steadily when he said that last one. This is my home, Daniel. I built my life in this house. I do not intend to leave it. He raised his hands. I'm just saying, you'd have less to maintain, less stress. I don't find my home stressful, I said. And I turned back to the groceries and ended the conversation. But the questions did not end. They evolved, became more specific. He started mentioning numbers, what the house might be worth, what half of it might be worth, how Robert had always meant for Daniel to inherit something substantial. I did not point out that Robert had left a will, and that I was familiar with its contents, and that it said nothing about Daniel receiving the house while I was still living in it. I filed those conversations in a part of my mind I was keeping careful track of. Then the credit card arrived. I was checking the mail on a Thursday afternoon in February, about 9 months after Daniel had moved in. There was an envelope from a bank I did not recognize. I opened it, the way I opened all my mail, and inside was a credit card in my name with a credit limit of $18,000. The account had been opened 3 weeks earlier. There had been no application on my end. I had signed nothing. I had authorized nothing. I sat down at the kitchen table, and I held that card, and I thought about all the ways this could have happened. I went through each possibility the way I used to go through a patient's symptoms methodically, ruling things out one by one until only one possibility remained. I did not confront Daniel that night. I want to be honest about why. I was afraid. Not afraid of him, exactly. Afraid of what confirmation would mean. Afraid of the door it would close behind us. The door that still had a small crack of light coming under it. The one that said maybe this was a mistake, maybe there was an explanation, maybe my son was still the boy who brought me dandelions. I was afraid of losing that crack of light. Instead, I called my sister, Carol. Carol is 64 and has lived in Nashville for 20 years and is the kind of woman who will tell you the truth even when the truth is not what you want to hear, which is precisely why I needed her. I told her everything. The questions about the house, the late nights, the way Daniel's voice dropped when I entered a room, the credit card. Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Margaret, you already know what's happening. You just need someone to confirm it. I know, I said. Then you also know what you need to do. I did know. I had known for a while. I just needed to stop being a mother for long enough to act like the woman I actually was. The next morning, I drove to the bank. I spoke to a representative and explained that a credit card had been opened in my name without my authorization. She pulled up the account. The card had been opened online, using my social security number and my date of birth. There had been 2 charges already, $340 at an electronics store and $1,200 at a restaurant supply company I had never heard of. I reported it as fraud. I filed a dispute. The representative gave me a number for their fraud department and told me I should also consider filing a police report. I thanked her, and I sat in my car in the parking lot for 10 minutes before I started the engine. I was not crying. I want to be clear about that. I was not sad anymore. I had moved through the sadness sometime in the night, while I was lying in my small bedroom listening to the television through the wall, and what had replaced it was something much quieter and much more certain. I called an attorney that afternoon. Her name was Patricia Holt, and she had been recommended to me years earlier by a colleague at the hospital. I had never needed her before. I needed her now. We met 2 days later. I brought every document I had: the deed to the house, Robert's will, the credit card statement, my financial records. I explained my situation in the same clear, organized way I used to give report at the end of a nursing shift. Patricia Holt listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me and said, "You've been patient for a long time." "I have," I said. "Let's stop being patient." Over the next 3 weeks, while Daniel was watching television and making phone calls in lowered voices and occasionally asking me if I had given any more thought to that retirement community, Patricia Holt and I were doing the following things. We were updating my will so that the house, my savings, and all my assets would go directly into a trust for Sophie, to be managed by Carol until Sophie turned 25. We were filing fraud documentation with the bank and with the police. We were consulting with a financial advisor about restructuring my accounts so that Daniel had no access to any of them, including my routing number, which he had apparently memorized at some point because it appeared on one of the fraudulent documents. And we were quietly, very quietly, contacting Claire. I want to talk about Claire for a moment. When Daniel and Claire divorced, I made a decision to remain neutral. I did not blame her. I did not ask for her side of the story. I simply maintained a warm, careful distance that allowed me to stay in Sophie's life without becoming a battlefield. Claire had always been respectful of that arrangement. She sent Sophie to me for the agreed-upon visits, and she never said anything negative about Daniel in front of the child. When I called her in March, I told her only what she needed to know: that I was concerned about Sophie's stability, that some things had come to light that I was not at liberty to fully discuss yet, and that I wanted her to be aware that changes were coming. Claire was quiet in the way careful people are quiet. Then she said, "Margaret, I have been worried about Sophie for months. Whatever you're doing, I'm with you." That conversation lasted 23 minutes. By the end of it, we had agreed on something that I believe was right for Sophie, even though it cost me something I will carry for a long time. I had been Sophie's stability, her one thing that does not shake. The afternoons at my kitchen table, the dandelion stories, the girl with the horses, I had been keeping her steady, but keeping her in that house, with Daniel's unpredictability and his lowered voices and his friends on the couch until midnight, that was not stability. That was me confusing my own need with hers. The night Daniel said what he said about Robert, that Robert had died just to get away from me, it was a Tuesday in April. Sophie was already asleep. Daniel had been drinking, which I knew from the way his movements were slightly too deliberate, the way a person moves when they are trying very hard not to look the way they feel. I had asked him, calmly, whether he had received any mail recently that he wanted to discuss with me. It was a measured question. I was giving him a door to walk through. He knew about the fraud report by then. The bank had sent a follow-up letter to the house, and he had opened it before I got to the mail, which told me he had been watching for exactly that kind of thing. He didn't walk through the door. He closed it and lit the whole hallway on fire. "You went to a lawyer," he said. His voice was low and flat in the way angry people get when they are trying to control themselves and failing. "You went to a lawyer behind my back, like I'm some kind of criminal. You opened a credit card in my name," I said. "I needed it for a few weeks. I was going to pay it back. I always pay things back." "Daniel, you've always done this." He stood up from the couch, and his voice rose with him. "Always holding things over my head, always making me feel like I owe you something. Do you know what it's like to grow up in this house? Do you know what it's like to have a mother who keeps a record of every single thing she ever did for you? Like a ledger, like a bill?" I watched him. I did not raise my voice. "I have never kept a ledger. You keep one in your head." He was pacing now, and his voice was getting louder, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I was aware of Sophie asleep in the next room, and I was hoping the walls were thick enough. "You think I don't see it? You think I don't know why you called Carol? Running to Carol like you always do, like I'm some kind of problem to be managed? I am your son, Margaret. I know who you are," I said. He turned and looked at me then, and something in his face shifted into something uglier, something I had never quite seen before on that face, even though I had spent 42 years learning every expression it was capable of making. "You are a sad, bitter old woman," he said, "and nobody wants you around anymore. Not even Dad wanted you, that's why he died, just to get away. The kitchen was very quiet after that. The refrigerator hummed. The tap in the sink had a slow drip I had been meaning to fix for weeks. I stood there, and I felt each word of what he had said settle into me. And I thought about Robert, my Robert, who had slow danced with me in this kitchen on our 30th wedding anniversary, who had called me his favorite person in the world 3 days before his heart attack, who had held my hand in the hospital when they told us it was serious and said, "Whatever happens, I'm glad it was you." I thought about Robert, and I thought about Daniel, and I thought about how love and grief and time can make a person believe they are owed things they have no right to. I turned back to the sink. I finished washing the pan. "We'll talk in the morning," I said. My voice was steady. I was surprised, honestly, at how steady it was. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my small bedroom, and I thought carefully and thoroughly about the next steps, and when the sun came up, I was ready. I did not wait for Daniel to wake up. I made coffee, and I sat at the kitchen table, and I called Carol, and I told her it was time. Carol had been expecting this call. We had discussed it. She knew exactly what to do. Then I called Patricia Holt. Then I called Claire. I sat at that table until I heard movement in the hallway, and when Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, unshaven and bleary-eyed, looking like a man who had also not slept well, I looked at him clearly and calmly and said, "Sit down, please. I have some things I need to tell you." He sat. I think he expected an apology. I think he thought the night had changed things in his favor, the way cruelty sometimes does when the person on the receiving end decides it is easier to make peace than to make demands. He looked at me with that practiced half-sorry expression, the one that says, "I went too far, but you probably deserved it." I did not apologize. I told him the following things, in order, without raising my voice. I told him that the credit card opened in my name had been reported as fraud to both the bank and the Columbus Police Department. I told him that a detective had been in contact with me and that the matter was proceeding through the appropriate channels. I told him that I had updated my will with the help of Patricia Holt and that the house and all my assets would now pass to a trust in Sophie's name, administered by Carol. I told him that I had spoken to Claire and that Claire and I had agreed it was in Sophie's best interest for her to return to her mother's home immediately and that Claire would be arriving at 2 o'clock that afternoon to pick Sophie up. I told him that he had 30 days to find alternative housing, as I would be requiring the guest room back at the end of that period. Then I picked up my coffee, and I waited. The expression on his face changed several times while I spoke. Disbelief, anger, a flash of something that might have been fear. Then, briefly, something that looked almost like shame, real shame, the kind that comes from seeing yourself clearly, not the performed kind. It was there for only a second, and then it was gone. "You can't do this," he said. "I have already done it," I said. "Sophie, you can't just send Sophie away. I have rights. Your custody arrangement is with Claire, not with me. Sophie has been living here under informal circumstances. I am not part of that legal agreement, and I have no obligation to maintain it. You went to Claire." His voice was different now, quieter, more dangerous, the way things get quieter before they break. "You went behind my back to my ex-wife." "I went to Sophie's mother," I said, "who is also a woman who loves that little girl. We had a conversation. We came to an agreement. That is called two adults doing what is right for a child." He stood up from the table, and I thought for one moment that he was going to do something he could not take back. But he didn't. He stood there, and he looked at me, and something happened in his face that I had not expected and that I have thought about many times since. His jaw moved. His eyes went wet at the corners. He looked, suddenly, like a boy, not the man-shaped stranger who had been sleeping in my guest room for 18 months, but the actual boy, the one with the baseball and the dandelions and the tears at his father's funeral. He was in there somewhere. I could see him. It did not change what I was doing. But I want to be honest, it was not easy to see. He left the room without saying anything more. Claire arrived at 2 o'clock with a car full of Sophie's things that she had quietly prepared at home. I had not told Sophie what was happening. That was Claire's conversation to have, and she had it, gently and carefully, in the living room while I waited in the kitchen. I heard Sophie ask one question that I could not make out. I heard Claire's answer, also too low for me to hear. Then I heard Sophie come into the kitchen. She stood in the doorway and looked at me. Those deep-set, old-soul eyes. "Mom said I'm going home," she said. "Yes, sweetheart. Is that because of Daddy?" I thought about what to say. "It's because your mom wants you home, and I think that's where you should be right now." She was quiet for a moment. Then she crossed the kitchen and put her arms around my waist and her face against my stomach the way she had the very first night. And I held the back of her head and I breathed into her hair and I told myself, "She is not being taken from you. You are giving her to safety. There is a difference. The difference matters." "Can I still come on Tuesdays?" she asked. We had a standing arrangement. Tuesdays after school. "Every Tuesday," I said. "I'll make the snack." She nodded against my middle. Then she let go, and she picked up her backpack from the chair, and she went with her mother, and I watched the car back out of my driveway from the front window. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in a long time. In the weeks that followed, I will not pretend everything was simple or painless. Daniel found an apartment, a studio near downtown, not what he was accustomed to, but sufficient, and he was gone by the end of the 30 days. He did not say goodbye when he left. He loaded his car in 3 trips while I was gardening in the backyard, and the last time I went inside the front door was closed, and his key was on the kitchen table, and he was gone. I stood there for a long moment, looking at that key. Then I put it in the drawer and went back to my garden. The fraud case moved slowly, the way legal matters do. I will not tell you how it resolved, because it is still making its way through the system as I speak, and my attorney has advised me to keep certain details private. What I will tell you is that I have a police report number and a case number and a very good attorney, and that is enough for now. What I want to tell you about is a Tuesday afternoon in May. Sophie came after school, the way we had agreed. She dropped her backpack on the same chair she always used. She sat at the kitchen table with her chin in her hand, and she told me about Mrs. Albright and Cora and the new book she was reading, which was about a girl who sailed across the Atlantic Ocean alone. She had moved on from horses, it seemed, to open water. I put the snack on the table, sliced apple with peanut butter, her preference since she was 4 years old, and I sat across from her and I listened, and the late afternoon light came through the kitchen window the way it has always come through that window. The way it came through when Robert was alive, and Daniel was small, and the house was full of a life I did not fully appreciate until I had to fight to keep it. "Grandma," Sophie said, tilting her head to the side the way she does when she's working something out. "Are you okay? Like, really okay?" I looked at my granddaughter. 8 years old. Those borrowed eyes. "Yes," I said. "And I meant it. I really am." She nodded like she had needed to verify this in person and was now satisfied with the report. Then she took a piece of apple and dipped it carefully in the peanut butter and went back to telling me about the girl who sailed across the ocean alone. And I listened, and the light came through the window, and the house was mine, and I was steady, and I was home. I have thought about what I would say to other women like me, women who have spent decades being strong for everyone around them, who have confused patience with permission, who have told themselves that staying is the same as loving. I have thought about what my younger self needed to hear, or what I might say to a woman sitting in her car in a bank parking lot, holding a credit card she didn't open, trying to find one more explanation that doesn't mean what she knows it means. I would tell her this: the moment you know, you know. And everything you do after that moment is a choice. Staying silent is a choice. Moving quietly is a choice. The question is not whether you are capable of acting. You have been capable your whole life. The question is whether you will finally act for yourself, with the same certainty and care you have always given to everyone else. I wiped my hands on the dish towel. I finished washing the pan. And then, for the first time in a very long time, I started doing things for me.